Sometimes things just feel fundamentally wrong, deeply unfair, right? But then you try to explain why, and legally, well, it turns out it's completely allowed. You're just left scratching your head thinking, wait a second, shouldn't that be common sense? Shouldn't that just be wrong?
Yeah, that disconnect between gut feeling and legal reality is pretty common.
Well, today on the deep dive, we're plunging right into that kind of collision, where what many of us think of as common sense fairness just slams headfirst into, well, legal reality, and the surprising group at the center of this particular deep dive. Motorcyclists. Now, you might not realize it, but they often face a surprising amount of systemic bias that just frequently flies under the radar.
It really does.
So our source material for this is a really fascinating collection of insights and, real-world examples. It's drawn from an article that really zeroes in on these legal loopholes and subtle biases against bikers. Our mission, pretty straightforward: extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, understand how and why this discrimination happens, and maybe see what it tells us about our laws and, I guess, our assumptions as a society. Okay, let's unpack this.
Absolutely. And a critical insight right off the bat is just how often this lack of specific legal protection opens the door to widespread bias that just goes unchallenged, especially when we're talking about groups that aren't, traditionally seen as vulnerable in the eyes of the law. It's kind of a blind spot for a lot of people.
That's a really powerful point, a blind spot. So diving into these real-world examples, where do we first see this common sense idea clashing with the legal loopholes?
Well, it plays out very clearly, and perhaps surprisingly for some, in the workplace.
The workplace? Wow, that's wild. I mean, you'd think your job should be about your skills, right? Your performance, not how you got there or what you do on weekends. Yet our sources show that employers can, actually, discriminate against motorcyclists. And there are basically no legal repercussions.
It's true.
Yeah, like take the story of a Reddit user. He's a vendor in Michigan. His boss suddenly just lays down this unwritten rule, right? No riding his motorcycle between stores during work hours. And there was absolutely nothing in the employee handbook saying he couldn't.
Right. Classic unwritten rule.
Exactly. The excuses were pretty vague, too. One manager called it a liability issue, okay? Another blamed some rogue employee taking a joyride, apparently. But then came the kicker. The manager, who just openly stated it, and I'm quoting directly here, rides a motorcycle is not really one of the protected classes.
Wow, that quote honestly just nails the entire problem. For those of you who may be familiar with anti-discrimination laws, you know that classifications like race, gender, religion, disability, those are protected classes. Federal law, state statutes say you can't be discriminated against based on those things. But motorcyclist simply isn't on the list.
It's just not there.
It's not there. And this legal void, this gap, allows employers to, as the source puts it, quiet them out legally. There's just no legal shield protecting a biker's job just because they ride a motorcycle.
So basically, without that legal protection, an employer's personal feelings or bias just gets a free pass. It's not about the job performance at all.
Precisely. It's a really stark illustration of how easily an employer's personal bias, maybe unfounded fear, can impact someone's livelihood when there's no legal way to fight back. For you listening right now, just consider what this means for personal freedom, for identity even, within professional spaces. Where do you think the line is? Between an employer's right to set rules and, well, an individual's right to their personal life choices, especially when those choices have zero bearing on how well they do their job.
It's such a tricky line, isn't it? And it feels like it gets even trickier when you shift from work to personal space, like your own home. What can someone tell you to do or not do in a place you actually pay to live in? Turns out, landlords are sometimes just as willing to act on biker bias as employers are.
Unfortunately, yes.
The article mentions this tenant. Her landlord suddenly banned her motorcycle from a spot she'd been using, shared with neighbors, no problem before. Why? Simply because the landlord changed her mind. That old excuse.
Ah, yes, the changed her mind clause, not usually in the lease.
Right. And another Redditor's advice, pretty blunt advice on the matter, kind of sums up the common feeling. Unless it's in the lease, she's full of shit.
And that Redditor isn't wrong if you're looking at it strictly from a contract point of view. Legally speaking, if your lease agreement doesn't explicitly forbid having a motorcycle, a landlord generally doesn't have the right to just remove it or tow it. The contract should be the final word. However, and this is a big however, as the source material points out, that legal argument often just falls on deaf ears in the real world. In many cases, the landlord's bottom line is simply no bikes, end of story. regardless of what the lease actually says or doesn't say.
So the contract might be on your side, but the practical reality could be totally different. The landlord just decides, nope, no bikes.
Exactly. It shows how informal bias, or maybe just a landlord flexing their power, can just override a contractual agreement when the group involved, like motorcyclists, lacks that protected status. It leaves the tenant in a really tough spot. Either you comply with this, like arbitrary rule, or you potentially face eviction proceedings, which are costly, stressful, even if you're technically legally in the right. I mean, what does this all mean for your sense of security, your freedom where you live? How much should a landlord's personal preference dictate how you use the property you pay for, especially for something like a vehicle?
Really does make you think about those power dynamics, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that kind of leads us nicely into public spaces and expressing identity. This is especially true for people in motorcycle clubs where, as the source really emphasizes, patches aren't style, they're identity.
Mm.
This isn't just about looking cool or a hobby for many. It's about belonging, community. It's deeply held personal expression.
Yeah, it's much deeper than just clothing.
Totally. And we see a fascinating legal fight in this case. Hessian's Motorcycle Club, VJC Flanagan's. Members of this club were told, straight up, they had to take off their colors, their club patches, just to go to a bar. And get this, the court actually sided with the bar. They ruled that banning the colors was a legitimate business decision in the name of safety, and totally legal because the rules supposedly apply uniformly to everyone wearing such patches.
Right. The uniformity argument is often key in those private business cases.
But then you contrast that with the Nevada Ninth Circuit Court. They looked at a similar issue, a blanket ban on colors in a courthouse, and they rejected it, called it unconstitutional without specific threat evidence. Big difference there.
Yeah, and this difference really highlights a crucial legal nuance. It's about how the law interprets expression versus safety, and critically, where this is happening. In a private place, like a bar, courts often give businesses broader latitude. They can set rules even if they impact personal expression, as long as they frame it around safety and apply it consistently. The thinking is, a private business has a right to refuse service.
Okay.
But in a government venue, like a courthouse, that's supposed to be the public square, protecting constitutional rights. So the bar for restricting expression is significantly higher. There, a blanket ban on something like patches is generally seen as unconstitutional unless there's concrete, specific evidence of a security threat. The government, unlike a private bar owner, has a much higher burden to justify restricting free speech.
So wait, essentially a bar owner can say no patches for safety, and that's okay. But a courthouse can't without proof. That feels like a pretty significant double standard depending on the building you're walking into.
It definitely can feel that way, yeah. And it raises a really important question for you, the listener. Where do you draw that line? Between a venue's right to keep things safe and an individual's right to express their identity or associate freely, when does a safety concern maybe become a convenient excuse to suppress a particular group, especially if that group isn't one of those legally protected classes we talked about?
And speaking of convenient excuses, let's dive into a really heavy hitter issue now, one that has actually gotten national attention. Discrimination against Black riders at public events. This is where bias gets even more insidious, really, because it often intersects with other, much deeper prejudices.
Yes, this is a critical area.
Our sources detail these events during Black Bike Week in Myrtle Beach.
Wow.
Black motorcycle riders, and they had the NAACP backing them. They sued city officials, local businesses. The accusations were pretty stark, deeply troubling. They claimed they were targeted with harsher law enforcement and bias closures. Targeted. While in contrast, white biker events got red carpet treatment. The sources make it really clear that multiple lawsuits ending in settlements expose systemic profiling based on race and biker identity.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, let's be clear. This isn't just about biker bias. This is a pretty clear example of racism masked as order. Biker identity, in the specific context, effectively became a proxy, a stand-in for racial discrimination. It allowed these deeply entrenched racial biases to come out under the guise of maintaining public safety or order, when the reality was differential treatment based purely on race.
Wow.
The fact that it took multiple lawsuits, significant settlements, just to expose this systematic profiling, it speaks volumes about how entrenched these biases can become and how difficult they are to actually dismantle.
That's incredibly frustrating. And it just highlights how prejudice can layer, right? One bias on top of another.
Absolutely. This brings up the critical importance of recognizing what scholars call intersectional discrimination. It's where prejudice isn't just about one thing, like race or being a biker. It's about Multiple layers here, race and biker identity combining. And that creates this compounded bias that's often harder to see, harder to fight. For you, the listener, just recognizing these patterns, understanding how prejudice can be disguised, sometimes even unintentionally, that's vital if we want to push towards a more just society.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. We've unpacked these 4 key areas where motorcyclists seem to face discrimination: the workplace, housing, public spaces, and these big public events. The core message, coming through again and again from our source, seems to be that riding doesn't give you legal armor.
That's right. That sums it up well. It really shakes out that employers, landlords, sometimes even public officials, they often get away with bias against bikers. Why? Precisely because the law doesn't offer them specific protection as a group. It highlights this major gap, doesn't it, between what feels intuitively fair, what we've been calling common sense fairness, and what's actually protected legally. It's a stark reminder, really, that if a group isn't officially designated a protected class, they often face this huge uphill battle against biases. They have to rely largely on individual challenges, case by case, rather than broad legal protections.
But okay, it's not all doom and gloom, right? The source also points to the counter-narrative, the power of pushback.
Definitely. There is pushback.
Yeah, groups like the Motorcycle Profiling Project, they're actively working on this, raising awareness, fighting these biases, even pushing for legislation that would give motorcyclists some kind of protection. And like we saw with those Myrtle Beach cases, lawsuits in big-name cases show that the system can be challenged. It is possible to push back, force accountability, and maybe lead to change, even if it feels slow sometimes. As the article powerfully concludes, we ride for freedom, but don't let them ride over you.
That's a great closing line from the source. And it really raises a crucial question for all of us, I think. When that common sense fairness, that gut feeling of right and wrong, isn't yet written into law, what is the most effective path forward? How can individuals and groups advocate for change? How do we push our legal systems to maybe catch up with evolving societal understanding or maybe just basic fairness?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. And perhaps a final thought for you to mull over. Consider what other groups, or maybe even personal choices, lifestyles, identities, what else might face similar, often overlooked, forms of discrimination? Situations where our common sense idea of fairness just falls short of actual legal protection. It's a fascinating and incredibly important area to keep thinking about.